Happy Melly Monday. You might remember Sylvia from a few months ago when I made her these spring clothes, but now that summer has arrived, it is far too warm in these, so it's time for a new look. First up, I have to remove her old clothes, and I'm carefully storing them in case I want to reuse them later. Now for a plan of what to do. You guys have given me many good suggestions, and I found some things at the garage sales, like this little hat. It fits the style, but it needs some work. With the hair, I'm not sure whether to keep the curls, since I found this pink synthetic hair, and I'd like to try giving her some braids. For the fabric choices, this used to be an old pillowcase with a different pattern on each side, so they fit well together. I also found this old pattern for a child-sized summer dress, and I really like this version of it, so I want to shrink it down to Sylvia's size. But first, because Sylvia is an older doll and well played with, her body isn't too pretty, so I'll cover up her fabric bits. I think I'll use the flowery fabric for the dress, so I'll use the checkered one for a blouse. I don't really have a pattern for this, so I'll just drape this bigger piece of fabric over her body and mark out the size for the back panel. The front will be two slightly overlapping pieces, and I'm sewing them together at the shoulders and side seams. Now I can measure and cut the arm's eyes before putting it on and pinning it in place with a hairpin. This now gives me the ability to trim the neckline to fit around her body. It does have to be tight enough to cover the white fabric though. To finish the edge off, I've marked the front center so I can measure the length of the neckline using a piece of fabric. Then I'll cut a matching one and sew them together to form a collar. This then gets trimmed, turned, and attached to the neckline, stitching down the seam allowance for a nicer finish. For the sleeves, I'm measuring the length and width I need, keeping in mind that they will be ruffled, before sewing the rectangles into tubes. Now I'm turning the tension and stitch length all the way up in my sewing machine to run a gathering stitch along the top edge of the sleeve. This will ruffle the fabric, and I can adjust the folds by pulling on the strings. The bottom edge of the sleeve gets folded and then also gathered. To attach them, I place the sleeve inside the bodice and fit, pin and sew the edges together. Now I can try the blouse on and adjust the sleeve edges to fit. And with the edges turned and a few buttons added, the blouse is finished. Now I can turn my attention to the dress pattern, and I want to use this style dress with the pockets in the front, and either this back with the bow or this one with just plain ribbons. I'm going to read the instructions carefully, and I'll shrink the bodice pattern down to fit Sylvia's size. Now I'm folding my fabric right sides together before placing my pattern on the fold, tracing it and cutting it out, leaving some seam allowance. I'm also making sure to transfer all lines and markings to the other half. On the back piece, I'm also marking where the ribbons are going to land, and I also need interfacing pieces to neatly finish the neckline, so I'm tracing the neckline of the bodice pieces and making a horseshoe shape from there. Now the bodice and interfacing pieces can be attached at the shoulder seams and the ribbons pinned in place. This is a bit tricky as they need to be pinned to the right side of the fabric so that they line up with the markings I made, but the angle needs to be flipped 180 degrees so it sits right after turning. I've just tacked them in place and I am attaching the interfacing right sides together, but I'm leaving the bottom back side open. After turning the piece and pressing the edge, I can insert the ribbons into the opening and stitch them down by hand. Now I can close up the side seams and take the bodice for a test fit. It fits really nicely and I don't think I should add sleeves to the dress since the blouse already has nice puffy sleeves. So I'm cutting off the seam allowance around the arm's eye, folding a piece of ribbon to form a miniature edge tape and using that to bind the edge. This finishes off the bodice and I can start on the skirt. I want the skirt to reach about to her knees, so I'm cutting a piece of fabric that is a bit more than twice Sylvia's circumference and the length from the bodice to the knees plus seam allowance. For the pockets, I'm cutting out 2 of the printed flowers on the fabric into pocket shapes, binding the top edge with the right ribbon, and after finding the middle of the skirt panel, I attach them symmetrically by folding under the edge and stitching it down. Now the skirt can be closed into a tube, the raw edges secured with a zigzag, and the top edge ruffled with a gathering stitch. As a waistband, I take some of the white ribbon and sew it into a ring the same circumference as the dress bodice, and I evenly distribute the gathered skirt onto it. After sewing and turning, I can try on the skirt portion of the dress and adjust the length. The edge gets bound with some more white ribbon to simultaneously finish the raw edge and give the skirt some more spring and volume. Lastly, the skirt and bodice are sewn together and the dress is finished. Moving on to her shoes. I want to make some white sandals, but her knobbly baby feet are hard to work with, so I'll spend some time off camera experimenting. I think I found something that works. So I start by tracing her foot onto some cardboard, and this might sound weird, but she's just a doll, so I'm temporarily pinning it to her foot. For the straps of the sandal, I'm using elastic bands and pinning them snugly into the desired patterns. This way I'll be able to remove the shoe later without having to add a closure. Once all of the straps are in place, I can add some table protection and fasten down the elastic with hot glue. Now I can remove all of the pins and use more hot glue to attach the shoes onto a white piece of cardboard. After the glue has set, I can remove Sylvia's feet and trim the cardboard to size. Since the sides of the shoes look a bit ugly, I'm using some white acrylic paint to cover them. I'm also quite fond of shoes that leave pretty patterns on the floor, so I'm using the thick acrylic paint to form raised sole patterns that resemble paw prints and little suns. Whilst those are set out to dry, I can focus on her head. I really wanted to braid her hair, but those curls just look adorable with the dress and hat, though the hat does need some work. I'm first removing all of the loose dirt and old hot glue, as well as any ends that are poking out, before painting it with the same white acrylic paint. This hat will definitely need a few more layers, but whilst that is happening, I can finish the shoes by erasing any leftover pencil markings and putting them on her feet. It is a bit fiddly, but eventually I get them on and they look just adorable. It is now a few days later and the hat has gotten a few more layers of white paint. I want to add a ribbon of this checkered fabric, so I measure the circumference and using the checkers as guides, I am cutting, folding, sewing and turning 2 even ribbons. One of them gets laid around the base of the hat and hot glued in place. The other ribbon first gets tied into a bow before I hand stitch the end closed and also hot glue it on. Now the hat is finished and can be put on Sylvia. Since it has a habit of falling off, I am discreetly securing it with 2 little white pins. And with that she is done and ready for a lovely picnic in the rose garden. And that was it for this week's episode. Leave a like if you enjoyed it, subscribe for more handmade content every Melly Monday, and give me your feedback and suggestions in the comments below. Thank you for watching and I'll see you all next Melly Monday.